What Trump just did might delay the beast system, but he can't stop it. With the stroke of a pen, Donald Trump signs an executive order that sends shockwaves through the global financial establishment. He bans central bank digital currencies in America, calling them a dangerous threat to freedom. But what if this isn't just politics? Let me show you exactly what Trump stopped. The Treasury Department was developing a framework for a digital dollar that would make China's digital yuan look like child's play, every transaction recorded and analyzed, real time flagging of prohibited purchases. But it gets worse. They weren't just planning to monitor your spending, they were planning to control it. This isn't speculation. This is exactly what programmable digital currencies can do, and the infrastructure was already being built. 2025 Oval Office. As Trump signs strengthening American leadership in digital financial technology, he doesn't just change policy, he potentially alters the prophetic timeline. Central bankers around the world watch in horror as the carefully constructed system hits an American roadblock. But here's what makes this moment even more significant. Trump doesn't just ban central bank digital currencies, he uses language that reveals he understands the spiritual dimensions of what he's fighting. Dangerous threat to freedom, government tyranny, take money from people's accounts without their knowledge. This isn't just economic policy, this is spiritual warfare. Throughout history, America has served as a restraining force against global tyranny, and Trump's executive order continues that restraining role. But notice something crucial in the biblical prophecy. The restrainer will eventually be taken out of the way. This isn't permanent resistance, it's temporary delay serving divine purposes. Let me show you the immediate global reaction to Trump's intervention. The Federal Reserve called emergency meetings within hours of the executive order. International coordination calls with other central banks began immediately. Public statements defending CBDC necessity flooded financial media. The European Central Bank expressed deep concern about potential US isolation from global financial systems. And here's what reveals the true nature of this system. Chinese officials actually celebrated Trump's CBDC ban, seeing it as an opportunity for China's digital yuan to dominate global digital currency adoption. Wall Street banks, which had spent billions preparing for CBDC integration, began intense lobbying campaigns. In a January speech in New Hampshire, Trump vowed to block the creation of a CBDC, calling it a dangerous threat to freedom and likening it to government tyranny. In a 2024 interview, he reiterated his concerns, labeling a CBDC as very dangerous and suggesting it could lead to money disappearing from accounts. He also expressed intentions to codify a CBDC ban into law. Trump signed an executive order which explicitly prohibits US agencies from establishing, issuing, or promoting CBDCs, citing risks to financial stability, individual privacy, and US sovereignty. The order also revoked President Biden's 2022 Executive Order 14,067. In the Old Testament, God used rulers like Cyrus to accomplish his purposes and protect his people. Isaiah 45:1 calls Cyrus his anointed. Could Trump be serving a similar role? A flawed human instrument being used by God to delay the prophetic timeline and protect his people. Because while Trump has delayed the beast system, the Bible reveals how the globalist will ultimately work around American resistance, and it's more shocking than you think. However, even with Trump's efforts, there are 10 reasons the Antichrist will rise despite global resistance. Reason 1: global instability creates desperation. The 15th of September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed, and within hours, the global financial system nearly came to a complete halt. But what happened next should terrify anyone who understands prophecy. World leaders didn't just call for national solutions, they called for global coordination, global oversight, global financial systems, and millions of desperate people who had lost their homes, their savings, their futures. They supported it. Here's why this matters. Revelation 13:17 describes a time when no one can buy or sell except one who has the mark of the beast or the name of the beast or the number of his name. For centuries, people wondered how this could be possible. How could one person control the entire global economy? But 2008 showed us something crucial. When people are desperate enough, they'll accept any solution, even if it means giving up economic freedom. And here's what's happening right now that most people aren't paying attention to. We are transitioning to digital currencies and cashless payment systems faster than ever before. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are being implemented in countries around the world. But this is just the beginning, because economic desperation doesn't just make people accept financial control, it makes them crave strong leadership. And that brings us to something that's happening in politics right now that should alarm every person who understands prophecy. But before we explore that, you need to understand how the second reason is already reshaping reality itself. Reason 2: Mass deception. In 2016, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in human history, information moved faster than truth. Social media algorithms could spread a lie to millions of people before fact checkers could even identify it. But here's what most people missed: this wasn't just a technological shift, it was a prophetic fulfillment. And for this reason, God will send them strong delusion that they should believe the lie. Notice Paul doesn't say lies plural, he says the lie singular. There's a specific deception coming that will be so powerful, so compelling, that even those who know the truth will struggle to resist it. And now we have technology that can create completely convincing videos of anyone saying anything. But here's the terrifying part: the same algorithms that spread misinformation today are already being used to shape political opinions, consumer behavior, and even religious beliefs. When the Antichrist appears, he won't need to convince people the old fashioned way. The infrastructure for mass deception is already in place. The population is already conditioned to believe what they see on their screens more than what they observe with their own eyes. And this connects directly to our third reason, which explains why even religious communities won't be able to resist, because something has happened to the spiritual foundation of our civilization that most people don't want to acknowledge. Reason 3: Religious apostasy and spiritual vacuum. Here's a statistic that should alarm every Christian. In 1970, 90% of Americans identified as Christian. Today, that number has dropped to 65% and is falling rapidly. But the real crisis isn't the numbers, it's what's happening to those who remain. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. This isn't just about people leaving church, this is about the church itself abandoning biblical truth in favor of messages that make people feel good: prosperity gospel, universalism, the idea that all paths lead to God. And here's why this creates the perfect conditions for the Antichrist's rise. When people have been conditioned to prioritize feelings over truth, comfort over conviction, they become susceptible to any message that promises peace and prosperity. But there's something even more dangerous happening. The spiritual vacuum left by declining Christianity isn't staying empty, it's being filled by New Age spirituality, political ideologies treated as religion, and what psychologists call meaning making systems that replace God with government, science, or social causes. When the Antichrist appears with signs and wonders, offering spiritual fulfillment and meaning, most people won't compare his message to biblical truth because they never learned biblical truth in the first place. And this connects directly to our fourth reason, which explains why global crises are actually accelerating his path to power. Reason 4: Desire for global unity amid crisis. Every major crisis in the last century has led to the same response calls for greater global coordination. World War I led to the League of Nations, World War II led to the United Nations, the 2008 financial crisis led to calls for global financial regulation. And here's the pattern that should concern every student of prophecy. Each crisis makes national sovereignty seem outdated and global governance seem necessary. But here's what most people don't realize. The Bible prophesies exactly this scenario. Revelation 13:7 says, "The beast was granted authority over every tribe, tongue, and nation." For centuries, this seemed impossible. How could one person rule the entire world? But we're watching the infrastructure for global governance being built right now: global health organizations, global financial systems, global climate accords. And here's the crucial point: People aren't resisting this trend, they're demanding it. Every new crisis makes more people believe that only global solutions can solve global problems. When the Antichrist appears, he won't need to conquer nations one by one. The infrastructure for a global rule will already exist, and desperate populations will hand him the keys willingly. But the technology to implement that control is advancing faster than most people realize. Which brings us to our fifth reason. Reason 5, technological surveillance infrastructure. In China today, there are over 200 million surveillance cameras monitoring citizens' every move. The social credit system tracks not just what people buy, but where they go, who they associate with, even what they say online. And if your score drops too low, you can't buy train tickets, get loans, or send your children to certain schools. But here's what's terrifying: this isn't just happening in China anymore. Similar systems are being implemented worldwide, often under the guise of convenience and security. Your smartphone tracks your location constantly, your credit cards record every purchase, your social media posts are analyzed by algorithms, and now we have the technology to consolidate all of this information into comprehensive profiles of every person on earth. Facial recognition can identify you in crowds, voice recognition can identify you on phone calls, even your walking pattern can be used to identify you from satellite footage. But here's the prophetic significance. Revelation 13:16 to 17 describes a system where no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark of the beast. For centuries, people wondered how this could be implemented globally. Now we know, and the most disturbing part, most people are accepting this voluntarily because it's convenient. They're trading freedom for efficiency, privacy for security, but the technology is only part of the problem. The deeper issue is cultural, which brings us to our sixth reason, reason 6, sinful world culture. Here's a question that reveals everything about our current moment. If someone asked you to define evil, could you give a clear, confident answer? Or would you say, well, it depends on the culture, the context, the circumstances? This shift from absolute to relative morality isn't just a philosophical debate, it's a prophetic development. When people no longer believe in absolute good and evil, they can't recognize absolute evil when it appears. Throughout history, the most evil regimes succeeded not because people actively supported evil, but because they had been conditioned to believe that moral judgments were subjective, that truth was relative. An entire generation has been trained to distrust their moral instincts. But here's the biblical warning. Isaiah 5:20 says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness." When the Antichrist appears, performing signs and wonders, speaking of peace and unity, promoting tolerance and inclusion, most people won't have the moral framework to recognize that his message, however appealing, leads to destruction. They'll judge him by his apparent results, not his ultimate intentions, by his charisma, not his character, by his promises, not his prophetic identity. And this is directly connected to our seventh reason, which explains why those who could resist will be systematically silenced. Reason 7, persecution eliminates opposition voices. Right now, as you're watching this documentary, Christians are being persecuted. Over 340 million Christians worldwide face high levels of persecution and discrimination. But here's what's particularly significant. It's not just happening in traditionally hostile nations. Western countries are seeing increasing restrictions on religious expression, growing hostility toward biblical values, and what can only be described as systematic marginalization of Christian voices. In some countries, it's already illegal to share certain biblical teachings. In others, Christian businesses are being forced to participate in activities that violate their religious convictions. Social media platforms regularly censor Christian content while allowing anti-Christian content to flourish. But even those who aren't silenced will face a different kind of challenge. Which brings us to our eighth reason. Reason 8, false signs, warns that the Antichrist's coming is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders. Notice it doesn't say fake signs and wonders, it says lying wonders. These will be real supernatural events, but they'll be used to support lies about who he is and what he represents. And here's what makes this particularly dangerous in our time. We've created a culture that values experience over truth, feelings over facts. People are more likely to believe something if it makes them feel good than if it's actually true. Jesus himself warned that these deceptions would be so convincing that if it were possible, even the elect would be deceived. Matthew 24 to 24. The key phrase is if it were possible. It suggests that even committed believers will find these deceptions challenging to resist. But the deception won't just be supernatural, it will be political. Which brings us to our ninth reason. Reason 9: Divine timing and prophetic inevitability. Here's the ultimate question that every person who studies prophecy must confront. If God has already determined that these events will happen, why should we try to prevent them? And if we can't prevent them, what's the point of resistance? The answer reveals something profound about the nature of prophecy itself. God doesn't predict the future, He declares it. And His declarations aren't just about what will happen, but about when it will happen. Daniel 9:24 provides a precise timeline for prophetic events, including the appearance of the Messiah and the coming of the Antichrist. It's not vague or symbolic, it's mathematically specific. But understanding divine timing doesn't make human choice irrelevant, it makes it supremely important. God's sovereignty doesn't eliminate human responsibility, it establishes the context within which human choices have eternal significance. Romans 8:28 promises that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to His purpose. This means that even the rise of the Antichrist, as terrible as it will be, serves God's ultimate purpose of bringing history to its appointed conclusion and establishing His eternal kingdom. So the question isn't whether we can prevent prophecy from being fulfilled. We can't. The question is whether we'll be prepared for what's coming and whether we'll maintain our faith when the world around us seems to be falling apart. And here's the most sobering realization. Most people contributing to these trends have no idea they're fulfilling prophecy. They think they're solving problems, promoting progress, building a better world. The bankers implementing digital currencies think they're increasing efficiency. The politicians promoting global governance think they're preventing conflicts. The technologists building surveillance systems think they're improving security. Even many of the people resisting these trends are doing so for the wrong reasons with the wrong methods, which leads us to a disturbing paradox. Here's something that will challenge everything you think you know about opposing the Antichrist. Much of what people call resistance is actually accelerating his rise to power. Every time someone tries to fight these prophetic developments using worldly methods, politics, activism, they create more chaos, more division, more demand for the strong leadership that the Antichrist will provide. But it does mean we need to understand what kind of resistance actually matters in the end times, because there is hope even in the midst of the rise of the Antichrist isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of the final chapter, and that final chapter ends with the return of Jesus Christ and the establishment of His eternal kingdom. Revelation 9 describes Jesus returning as King of Kings and Lord of Lords to defeat the Antichrist and establish justice on earth. But here's what you need to understand. The real battle isn't political or economic or technological, it's spiritual, and it's already been won at the cross. The Antichrist's power, however impressive it may seem, is temporary and limited. Jesus Christ's power is eternal and absolute. The question isn't whether good will ultimately triumph over evil, that's already been determined. The question is which side you'll choose while the battle is still raging. And here's the hope that should sustain every believer through the coming darkness. Those who remain faithful during the tribulation period will rule and reign with Christ during His millennial kingdom. Revelation 20 promises that those who had not worshipped the beast or his image and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The suffering is temporary, the glory is eternal. America's CBDC resistance might be like adjusting course on the Titanic, buying time but not changing the ultimate destination. And here's what the Bible reveals about America's prophetic destiny. If America is end times Babylon as described in Revelation 17 to 18, then its current resistance to the global system creates a fascinating contradiction. How can Babylon resist the beast system while also being part of it? The answer might be that America's resistance is temporary, serving divine purposes before its eventual collapse and integration into the global system. Therefore, her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judges her. Sudden, catastrophic judgment on the commercial superpower that dominates global trade. For in 1 hour, such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, "What is like this great city?" The collapse will be so sudden and complete that the whole world will be shocked. But here's what connects this to the restrainer prophecy. And now you know what is restraining, that he may be revealed in his own time. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work.